Welcome to Pratidhwani, where we try to humanize science. I'm your host, GV Pawan Kumar. It's my delight, pleasure, and absolute honor to have my colleague, Professor Aparna Deshpande. Aparna is a condensed matter physicist who is an expert in scanning tunneling microscopy. She's an experimental physicist. She's also an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, Pune. And she has been not only interested in physics, research in physics, but also in pedagogy. She is also part of our Department of Education and has taken a lot of initiatives. She also heads our wonderful science activity center, which actually has probably played one of the most crucial role in taking science from labs, research boards, all the way to public, not only in English but also in other Indian languages, and importantly within Maharashtra in Marathi, and also in Hindi and other languages. And it's an absolute delight that we have Aparna here. Thank you, Aparna.
Thank you so much, Pawan. Good to be here finally. I have been postponing this. And most importantly, before we get into the discussion, I want to compliment you for starting this. This is a much needed initiative, and we really need to tell people that we scientists are also human, as fallible, gullible as any common person, and that and also there are stories around our profession which don't get told often enough, and I think this is a much needed exercise that you have started upon.
Absolutely, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, Aparna, as we do with all the guests, we will start with the origins. Tell us a little bit about how you got interested in science. What were your main kind of points related to upbringing and your formative years?
Yeah, so I come from a very humble background. My father was a officer in the state government, so we lived in a government colony in Bandra East. So I was born and brought up in Mumbai mainly because my father was there, and as far as I can remember, I did I did well in school, and I used to like to teach. Okay, and I would, in our apartment, there of course there would be wooden doors, and then I would ask my father to buy me chalks, and then sometimes a duster if he had the luxury, and I would, sort of imagine that I'm in a classroom, I'm teaching students, and I'm discussing things, and coming from a lower middle class family with a very humble background, and no role models in the family as such to look up to, especially with respect to this profession, I wanted to be a teacher, to teach a subject, and then it happened to be science. And since typically, you know how it was in those days, if you did well in school, science was often the choice. And so I ended up doing science, and then I went to Ruparel College in Mumbai. I did well in the 10th standard, and I went to Ruparel College in Mumbai. And 11th onwards, I started liking physics, and I told my father that I don't want to become a doctor or an engineer, and he was very kind enough, and he said that you decide what you want to be. He said maybe you want to try engineering, and I said no. And so I said I want to study physics. That was a very humble goal that I had. And to this day, I'm fortunate enough, to this day I get to do what I always wanted to do, which is to study physics and then to communicate.
Wonderful, wonderful. In an important aspect of upbringing, directly or indirectly, there will be a huge influence of parents, and I assume you would also kind of have some very interesting experience where they probably prodded you to take up science. Growing up in Mumbai, which also has a very kind of diverse culture, a lot of people. How was it? How was it at home? Were you exposed to any books at early stage?
Well, not much in that sense. See, actually, my older sister is 19 years elder to me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I lost my mother when I was in my 3rd standard.
Sorry.
So it was all along my father, and then my sister got married when I was in 5th standard. And she and I don't share that kind of a bond. So she's not a mother figure to me as such. I mean, I have good relationship with her, but that spot in my life has always been vacant. So it was all my father all along who was very serious about one thing, that you should should study, not miss school, and get good marks. I mean, he was 1929 born. He passed away a few years back. So for that generation, marks were the only measure of you being sincere and doing well. And even sadly enough, I never had good teachers. So, whom I would say who gave me the love of science or something. And physics began with a very simple thing. See, when 12th, 11th, 12th, maybe now it is earlier, when you get exposed to this centripetal force and centrifugal force. And, Mumbai, we travel by bus and trains, and buses, when they turn. And that was so fascinating. That was my first realization, that this abstract, physics is abstract, but then it is very much everywhere. And that motivated me to sort of study it further. And so BSc, I was in Ruparel College, and we had a very good electronics teacher. And then there were some teachers in between who taught, this wave particle duality, and sort of things started growing. And you can see, there was no role model, nobody to discuss this with. So it was my thing and my library explorations, whatever. And the other interesting thing was, I did a vacation students program in Ayuka. Okay.
Nice.
And then I had some a couple of very good friends in my masters. Okay. So there's a friend, she came from Parle College, which is Sathe College now called in Mumbai. So Ruparel and Parle College were the very most coveted colleges, at that time. And then I realized that in her college there was a lot more exposure with respect to taking up research, and so Ruparel in that sense had no such presence as such. And so my friendship with her was also instrumental in getting to know different things and research as a field. And we got to know about the vacation students program and how it is typically for most people that you look at the stars and then you read brief history of time and then you start falling in love with physics, and then you realize that how different that whole thing is, that charm is. I did a vacation students program when Professor Narikar was there. And I did something with Professor Dadich about, general relativity. And I realized, the hard way that as much as I like to read this, I can't be doing this day in and day out because it is very different. Astrophysics and astronomy, and, it's such a big romance at that age.
Absolutely.
That, you look up at the sky and then you can see atoms. You can see the stars, but you look at a material, you can't see atoms, right? And that sort of, then I thought, no, I want to do something more experimental and more sort of related to things that we do in day-to-day life.
Fabulous.
So then I went on to do my MSc in physics again from Mumbai University. But then I taught for a couple of years.
Nice.
Before
That's where your teacher I should mention Aparna is a very enthusiastic teacher. She also actually has initiated a lot of programs. As we'll come to the discussion also related to the education, which is an important point. So Aparna, this is a fabulous kind of progression within your thinking. Lot of people, including myself, actually got motivated to do physics by getting introduced to astrophysics and astronomy. And that's probably still one of the greatest.
Yes, it still is. The first year students, they say that.
Because it also connects you to slightly broader perspective of the human universe. And also,
it feels very accessible.
Exactly. So this part of, honing your skills and, adapting yourself and asking yourself what you want to do. As you mentioned within few sentences that you made a transition in your thinking where you wanted to do something more concrete, experimental, which for various different reasons is a small subset compared to the larger set of people who go into physics.
Right.
Because majority of the students, at least in India, tend to gravitate towards theoretical physics.
Right.
Experimental physics has its own charm. It also is something which is not clearly taught in schools. Right? In schools, there is not much of emphasis, at least to my knowledge and whatever I've been seeing, not much of emphasis on using your hands in thinking. And you have thought about this a lot. I would want to also just pick your brain on the fact that why does this happen? Why does that students who would want to do physics generally go towards slightly more theoretical compared to experimental aspect?
I think a lot of that is rooted in science education. The way science gets taught and the way, if you don't go to fancy schools, you don't end up doing any experiment in your school, right?
Yeah.
And then you are not taught to question. Okay, and though this might be changing, we hope in some ways, but still the way science is a process of inquiry, and that's why science education, inquiry should be a big part of education.
Right, absolutely.
How many times do teachers come and ask you some questions that will lead you to a topic. And then sort of open up a small experiment in that area, or some equation which is telling you very nicely that phenomenon. This doesn't happen, and so I think that is rooted somewhere in science education, how education should be done.
Absolutely. In fact, that's a pertinent point what you're mentioning, because somewhere within the formative years, if people do understand, especially children understand that this is also a way of thinking, right? Because
Right.
To really answer a question, you can do an experiment.
Yes.
This is something people don't get it, right? Because if you have let's say a question in physics,
Right.
the general convention is that you sit down and
Start with your differential
give
equation.
equations.
Or,
It has its value. I am not denying that, but it is incomplete because without that, going and testing out in the natural world, it is very critical. Did you also have some very strong influences in your school who actually took you to this kind of thought process, or you got exposed to certain things within your formative years?
No, I think, sometimes when you don't have things, that also acts as a plus. And like I said, not having teachers, to whom I can say, oh no, this is what I got from X and Y and Z. So maybe there is some observation, some internalization, some learning from failures that you, of course, encounter in your life. And like I said about, in classrooms where, when you're a smart student, you automatically get included.
Yeah,
but what about the backbenchers who must be curious enough? They, I'm sure, have something to contribute. But do they also get asked these questions, whether you've understood something, whether you have something to say? So there are so many things. But no influences as such. I'm sorry to say, but that's how it has been.
No, because a lot of things happen also organically, so to speak, because you stumble upon something and then develop interest.
Correct.
Not all interests are just only because somebody really told you, right?
Yeah,
because most of the time, in fact, even research problems we find that way.
Correct.
So tell us a little bit about your college days, Aparna, especially your university days. Mumbai University also is a very accomplished place in terms of, has a long legacy, and physics department, and also even other departments are very well known there. How was your experience there?
During BSc, like I said, we had a couple of good teachers, where the electronics teachers, that's why, like I said earlier, I like electronics as a subject, because she taught us very well. And in my masters, we had a couple of professors who for quantum mechanics and for electrodynamics. But somehow maybe I probably also, sometimes there is also timing of things that our head of the department then, so Mumbai, so Homi Bhabha Center flyers would always be there in the department. And I was telling him once that maybe since I like to teach, I should do a PhD in science education. So he said, no, you are young, you first go do some experimental work and then come back to science education. And so we'll come to that later, how it went a full circle. I think something that happened as a small talk between me and the chair then. So that time, the emphasis, I did during my masters, I took electronics as a specialization.
Nice.
And then I realized that, thank God, I didn't get tempted to do engineering, because this is okay for this project. I can't do this again for a longer period of time. So, and then, like I said, after teaching for a couple of years, again, I had in my masters a friend who was going to the US. And she was a good friend. And then that sort of made me think that maybe this might be an option where I can sort of dream of taking this big a leap of going abroad and trying to pursue a PhD. And a couple of places I had tried right after my MSc, which were not successful, obviously.
Okay.
And then I thought, okay, let me teach for some time and let me sort of reorient myself and look for other options, and not think that this is the end, and since I have failed and this is the end. No. And so then that led to me going abroad.
Abroad, okay. See that kind of a chance event always plays a critical role, where you come across somebody and you suddenly have a conversation, or you just talk to somebody.
Right. Because, and it also depends where you come from. See, where I came from, taking this big a leap was very difficult. Of course, it was not impossible financially also. And then I got to know about this J.N. Tata Scholars Program, where they give you the ticket. So it is based on both the merit and your family background. And so I got that fellowship, and I got the ticket to go to Ohio.
That was
from that. It was a part of that scholarship that I got.
Wonderful.
And I was lucky, and that again, that interview was also, it went well for me. And so there are things, like they say, it takes a village. So you have influences that sort of play a role in your life.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. See, crucial element before we really get into your America phase of your education. It's an unusual thing, Pranav, because somebody who is growing up who also has faced challenges right at the level of your family, where you had to actually grow with a single parent, and then go ahead and come to the level where there is also enough encouragement for you to do science and research. It also kind of reflects very well on your father, because without that kind of support, you would have not probably come to that stage. It is an unusual thing, because even with all the with all the support systems, with all the economic privileges, people would not be able to take this step. But here you are taking this. Could you tell us a little bit more about it, because it is not an usual thing.
Right. See, also, this in the sense, what my father wanted me to do is, okay, you've done MSc, you do B.Ed, and then you get a lecturer's job, and then I can get you married, and then I'm done. And so there's a slight personal edge to this. I'd seen my older sister not very happy, and I was telling my father that I will not succumb to this kind of a pressure. You let me go, you let me study, and there will be ways, I'll find my way. But right now I cannot take this step. And then he said, okay, then if this is what you want, then you go ahead. He didn't say that I'm getting older and you stay back for me, or none of that sort. And he's that stoicity is something, because my father also had a very challenging life.
Yeah, exactly.
And I really look up to him, because he was of course deeply religious, but also he had a stoic approach to life. And a spiritual base also, not religious in the rigorous sense of the term, but he was very spiritual. And that sort of, it's indirect sanskar, which, even Sudha Murthy would agree, that those play a role in your life. And so that gave me the courage to take the step. That this is, my life, my fight, and I do not want to get dragged by certain other expectations that you would have, or fulfillments that you need to do. So that was a struggle. Definitely a struggle.
No, it's a remarkable maturity, both on the side of your father and on your side, right? Because it's not a easy step to take, right? It's a challenging thing. Now, how was your transition from India to US? How did it happen?
Thankfully, I had a set of friends, like I said. So that part was not very difficult. Of course, when you go there, you are thrown into a pool of people, and then you are also trying to navigate your way, because condensed matter, experimental physics is huge. And then materials, condensed matter is also, it's not very easy to decide. So I had changed a couple of labs once. So I did a short project with a with the chemistry faculty, where she was growing these crystals, which are called zeolites. And then I realized that this not really appealing to me.
Okay.
And then there was one STM lab which I had joined, where I thought the work was very monotonous. And the lab that I finally ended up joining was this STM and manipulation lab, where you do some manipulation with that, which was a lot more exciting and engaging. And then it was not easy, of course. No PhD is easy, like
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
always say. But yeah, it worked out. Yes.
Wonderful. So now that you've reached Ohio State University,
This is Ohio, not Ohio State.
Oh, this is Ohio University.
Ohio University. So Ohio University is in Athens, Ohio, which is about
Okay.
2 hours from the airport. OSU is close to the airport.
Okay.
And it's a small university town. The physics department was good.
Yeah.
We
In
had
fact-
a PK's fellow and like Presidential Early Career Award a professor with whom I worked for a bit also. And the physics department as such was very
awesome.
nice. And I used to attend the theory group meetings also on and off. And small place, informal.
Yeah,
So that
very
is
nice.
nice.
That's
No
always-
unnecessary, extraordinary pressure as such.
Nice. American system is also very kind of rigorous system, especially at the graduate school level. It really, brings out the researcher in you. Generally speaking, especially when you take the coursework, you will have to get through the qualifier. All those things
Yeah.
are an important part. So give us a gist about your research problem, what you worked on during your PhD, and also introduce to our listeners and also viewers about scanning tunneling microscopy,
Yeah, sure.
which is an outstanding microscope,
correct,
which actually has played a critical role in physics.
Right. So the scanning tunneling microscope. So see, we know that light can behave as a wave and as a particle. Matter can also behave. That's the beauty and the symmetry that we see in nature. And so when we say matter, it comes down to electrons, and that an electron can behave like a wave as well as it can behave like a particle. Okay. That the electron can behave like a wave is what is at the heart of a scanning tunneling microscope. Because in a scanning tunneling microscope, what you end up doing is you go very close to a conducting surface and using a probe, which is, in common parlance, a needle, like a tip. Okay, you go very close and you're a few angstroms away from the sample. Okay, the distance between the needle, the tip, and the sample. Sample is a nice flat conducting piece of a material. When you are so close and you apply voltage either to the tip or to the sample, what starts happening is you see a flow of current. Now we are used to current flowing through a continuous piece of wire. Okay, like our old-fashioned tungsten bulb. The filament breaks and then there is no current. Okay, but here when the tip is not touching the sample, you still have current. That's because of the overlap of wave functions, and the psi square is the probability that the electron tunnels from the tip to the sample. So all your textbook quantum mechanics that you study, here you visualize.
Yes.
So
yes.
visualization of quantum mechanics is at the heart of the scanning tunneling microscope. And then of course you wire it up a little differently, and then you can do spectroscopy. Now again, spectroscopy, immediately you think of light. But you do spectroscopy using tunneling electrons. Then you get to know the conduction band, the valence band. Again, this is textbook chemistry that you encounter. And then superconductivity. So there are interesting materials that you can probe. And also then you go one step further. So see, Feynman had said that there's plenty of room at the bottom, and this is at the heart of nanotechnology.
Exactly.
And what Feynman meant then is using individual atoms and molecules as your building blocks of circuits. Now what I got to do during PhD is to actually play with single atoms, single molecules, see what their properties are. And so of course, so Feynman, the greatest scientist and the visionary. So he had this vision. To realize a vision, we all know it's easier said than done. But there are of course many hurdles to achieving a single atom or a molecule as a functional element of a circuit. But that idea was there, that it can be tested. And of course, when you're looking at one problem, there are always, and this happens many times with STM, that there is no set one goal that you start out with, because there are many peripheral things that also emerge from your study.
Nice.
And that's why it's very interesting to look at materials with STM.
Fabulous, fabulous. And your PhD research problem, what did you work
So
on?
that was about, again, so if you have a silver atom on a surface, metallic surface, silver surface, and you have a bromine atom, okay, do you require the same amount of force using the tip to move a bromine atom as well as a single silver atom? So that was one big problem that I was looking at. And interestingly, to get the silver atom, we use a substrate. So this is macroscope. You use a plow to get some mud out. So you get silver clusters out from the surface, and then from the clusters, how you would separate things. You pull out a single atom from a silver cluster. You pull out a single silver atom.
Nice.
And then you try to do with lateral manipulation with the STM tip. You go very close to the surface, and then you try to move. So because the tip is so close, the atom will respond. Now, how the atom responds is where the physics is. So either it will come close to the tip, sometimes it will get attached to the tip, or it will move away from the tip, or it will jump in steps which correspond to the lattice of the atoms underneath. And then the bromine atom also does the same thing, but then the signals are different. And interestingly, to get the bromine atom on the surface, there was another project that my lab mate was working on using molecule. So this was a porphyrin molecule, which is like a square planar molecule, and it has legs which end in C6H5Br or C6H5IA. So what I did was I dissociated the C-Br bond, and then after breaking that bond, now this all would sound like science fiction, but from a molecule, you focus on the bond. So it's a very localized technique, right? Like I said. And you pull out a single bromine atom from the molecule, and then you manipulate you do this comparison. So it was very exhausting, but very, very exciting and a very fundamental study in that sense.
Wonderful. See, one part I would want to specifically ask is, you mentioned exhausting, but also very joyful in a sense. That's experimental physics in two words.
Yes, correct.
Give us a kind of picture, Aparna, about what it takes for experimental list to really get started. Generally it's much easier for somebody who has already spent a long duration in a research lab. And research lab is nothing like an undergraduate lab. This is something I keep telling to
unknowns.
Exactly, it's all unknowns. So give us a gist of that experience, because this is a notion, unfortunately, most of the education system in physics does not introduce you to, especially at the formative years. Of course, in places like IISER Pune, we do have labs. Students also do projects.
Yes.
So that gives them good exposure. But most of the students might not have that exposure to experimental physics. So tell us what it takes to become an experimentalist.
Okay. So when you start working in an experimental lab, there are many things that you come across for the first time. Okay. And the first question, so the how and the why has to go hand in hand. Suppose, if you're even under an optical microscope, if you're looking at a material, how exactly you're getting that image, right from that to how is it zooming, what is the scale. So there are many things. So continuously you need to ask both these questions. Okay. And you should not take anybody's word for it, because at the end of the day, when you're doing your research problem, you are the first person to get convinced. You convince yourself, then you go to your lab mates or you go to your advisor, and then you show him or her what you've got, and then the fun builds up, and then you realize you have something to communicate to the world.
Absolutely.
But the how and the why, this you should start. Don't take anybody's word for it, even your advisors. You try and realize or get the proof of things for yourselves, either be it small or large. And see, for me, when I joined my group, so my advisor had moved there from Germany, and he was building this STM. So it meant a home built system, the design for which he had, meant a lot of, putting together the vacuum chamber. That experience is valuable.
Yeah, yeah.
To wiring the STM, and then to going to the machine. Ohio University had a dedicated huge machine shop in the basement, and that expertise was phenomenal. And though people there, so they would machine small parts, and it was the first time to see something like this in action.
Fabulous. Yeah.
And of course troubleshooting, either whether the pressure is good enough, then see, the STM is, you can sit on the palm of your hand.
Yeah.
But I must say that I was working with a ultra high vacuum low temperature system, which meant this kind of a small microscope was housed inside a vacuum chamber, and since it was low temperature, so it worked by cooling.
Nice.
So it had wires that would get cooled, and it was sitting at the base of a cryostat. So all this, it was, such a different world, that such sophistication that was there at every level, right from using piezoelectric materials to specialized wires for cooling. So it was a very, very enriching experience.
Yes.
And of course, when you start working with your project in an experiment, you're working with a piece of equipment which you have to understand very well. And the machine you should know very well, and sometimes things can go wrong, which is a part of the process and you learn every time. And so you have to be open-minded. You should not be scared. And the why is in the house, and that kind of an environment has to be there in the lab also. And fortunately for me, my PhD advisor was not at all a micromanager, and so that helps, because then you are also it's a training. PhD is a training now to become independent, and that was vital. After every image, he wouldn't say that, oh, do this, do that. He'd say no. It would give some cursory advice, and then you will have to find a way. And I think that is very important.
It's an important lesson for everybody, any student who is listening.
And patience.
Patience. Absolutely.
Patience. At the end of it all, patience.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. In fact, that is something I keep telling also to a lot of students. It's a temperament and also the background what you have, because without knowing the fundamental physics, it will be difficult to do research. But that is not sufficient, right? Because you need to also have a temperament to go and be patient and do a lot of work. This also means that you would be exposed to scholarship from a variety of areas. Condensed matter physics is generally the broad umbrella you have. American system also has a wonderful network of people who have very interesting kind of viewpoints on how, let's say, condensed matter physics is done. It's a very large physics community. In fact, probably it is even bigger than the high energy physics community, if I'm correct, right?
Possibly, because see, every year, this I must say, every year we would go to the March meeting. The APS March meeting. And that
American Physical Society
American Physical Society. A March meeting is when all this condensed matter, the materials community would gather. And see, the training I see. So there we would, again, I really give credit to my advisor for this, because he would make sure that we would present something. And there it would be 10-minute talks plus 2 minutes or 12 plus 3, something like that. But so I am trained like that. I never go overtime, because that training, 10 minutes, you have a small piece of work that you have to present, and that used to be phenomenal. There, you actually get out of the lab, you go travel to another city, and you deliver your talk in front of so many people. That exposure, I think that is very important.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and if there's a chronology, if it comes up in the chronology, I'll say that we should have something like this in India. But
We'll come to that point. I would want to also get your thoughts on broader research pursuit in India. This is also a phase probably where you are, getting exposed and also getting a lot more experience in talking about physics, writing about physics, which Aparna does very well. And I've also read some of the stuff what you've written, and also the way you communicate with students. Where did those things come to Aparna? where did those parts of your expertise and your kind of knowledge base come into to the forefront?
So see, communication, I think, is at the heart of science, and it somehow never it's always there in the background. It's never at the forefront. It's
Forefront.
always in the background. And somehow, since, like I said, I always wanted to teach. So, looking up things that I didn't understand or I understood well, or writing about small pieces, or even in my lab, again, the first draft or writing something for our own work, I was always happy to write my
Right,
first draft and give it to my advisor. So that somehow is a skill it takes years, and I love to write, and I keep practicing on that and reading up about it. But that sort of something that grew with time. And again, Feynman lectures for small things, big things, and how he explains things. I mean, that's I think at the epitome of all teaching.
Absolutely.
So that somehow, I think these were peripheral things that grew with time.
Nice. Wonderful. It would have also influenced you to think seriously about education, right? Because
Science journalism was one thing. I was, after PhD, I was thinking, maybe, should I not? Or,
is it?
Yeah.
Nice.
But at least at some background, I had this thing. But then I chose to do a postdoc.
You tell us about that. So you finish your PhD, and then you head towards your postdoc.
So in the March, so what I did was I was looking up March meeting abstracts of people, and then I saw Brian Leroy's lab I worked in as a postdoc, and I saw that Brian had worked on carbon nanotubes, and then he was setting up his lab. It was STM again, and it was, since I was in love with the technique for sure, and I thought, okay, looking at different problems will be interesting. And I thought, okay, why not? So I met him during March meeting, and then I remember he said, I don't really need a postdoc, which was very interesting and very honest on his part. Means he was setting up the lab, and his system was to arrive then. And then I said that, this is my background. And so he said, okay, he'll get the letters. And somehow things worked out well. And
this was where in which university?
This was in University of Arizona at Tucson.
Oh, okay.
And I, having lived 6.5 years in Ohio, with all the weathers and all, and and the snow and the winter, I was ready to go to a warm place. So
especially coming from tropical Mumbai.
Of course, from Mumbai, Ohio, you can imagine. And then Arizona was a nice place. I liked it, and again, working there. And so that was, when graphene was just starting to come up as a material. And so Brian had a collaboration with another UCR. I think now she has moved to OSU, I think.
Okay.
The group who gave us the samples. And she sent us some samples, and we just started. And I remember how much I struggled to get the first sight of hexagons. And after that, there was no looking back. And it was a very enriching experience. Brian had a different working style, and again, from there also we went to APS meetings. So then it's a cultural thing, Every lab, pretty much every lab goes, and advisors are generally very nice to have funding for their students because that visibility for students is very important.
Very important, absolutely.
And fortunately, none of the labs that I was in, where you are just a pair of hands and you're giving data to the advisor, that never happened. And
such an important point.
It's such an important point.
In fact, that feeling of belonging should be important for students.
Yeah, belonging and ownership of the project.
Ownership of the work.
And that mentorship is extremely crucial.
Absolutely.
And after that, just to finish my postdoc, so I was, for a year, I was with Mark Hersum. Again, Mark's lab I discovered because I wanted to come back, and I wasn't sure if this is enough. And so I was also looking, I said 3 years were done. No, Mark's lab was in Northwestern. So 3 years I was done with working in Brian's lab. And then Mark was also working with molecules and, of course, STM. And he was also he had started growing epitaxial graphene. So I thought this is, both my expertise combined together. And so I applied to Mark's lab, and he had a project, and he selected me there. And I think that 1 year was very crucial. I could have stayed for 2 more years, but I got this job, so I came back. Also, my father was growing old, so I had to come back. And, you know, material science and engineering department is where Mark's lab is.
Yeah.
And I was amazed. See, all along I was in physics department.
Yeah.
And so Mark's idea was to grow epitaxial. I had a PhD student, and in his lab who was working on this, and his senior student was to go for a postdoc position. And his idea was to have a molecule on epitaxial graphene. Okay. I saw what molecule they were working on, and then I was looking up at literature, and I found a very interesting molecule, okay, which polymerizes on UV light. And I told Mark that, Mark, this molecule looks interesting, and you know there are some reports on graphite that it polymerizes. Let's try, and again, Mark was very happy, and that worked. And you know, when I show, so what happens is, you know, so these are acetylene linear chain molecules. And when they polymerize, the central backbone, the double bond becomes a triple bond.
Nice.
And then in the STM image, it looks arced like a background. So you can easily make out the polymerization. And so Mark ordered a viewport, UV transparent viewport. We could shine UV light. And when it worked, of course, Mark was happy. I was very happy. And the fun part comes now when Mark had like 10 ideas. What you can do with this.
Nice.
Okay, typically with physics background, you say, okay, let's do spectroscopy, let's see what orbitals, this and that. But you know, and I was so amazed at how material science people think.
Yes.
That you know, how directly you can connect it with some applications, and you know, that's the thought process. Everything need not tomorrow get realized in an application. But this photopolymerization was very nice, and it was a rich experience that 1 year, and it also gave me, you know, you grow, right, in all these processes. And that growth, I think, it mattered and still matters a great deal. And I had the pleasure of inviting Mark here, and you know, he gave a talk, and it was nice to connect.
So what is a broad lesson you take out of that experience in PhD and postdoc, Aparna? And of course, I'll come to the reason why you came back too, but kind of a broad lesson you took from that experience.
So, firstly, you have to believe. So, firstly, your motivation has to be in the right place. You know, you want to study materials, you want to understand something that's not going to be easy, and it's something that, you know, that moment. I still remember that, you know, that day when I was manipulating silver and bromine atoms, and I realized that, you know, the threshold resistance, what is threshold resistance and how. So you are the first person to do that. That in itself is a big factor of motivation. And so your love for the subject. So for me, like I was telling you earlier, that it could be a very boring story because it started with the love for the subject. That was always genuine. It continues to be genuine. So that motivation stemmed from there. And secondly, here failure is a part of the process. That you must understand. So that's why your motivation has to be fixated very firmly.
Absolutely.
Failure is a part of your process, and the hows and the why, as I said, that you have to continue, keep at it. Your perseverance matters, your patience matters, perseverance matters, and if you are motivated enough, paths open up for you.
Nice. Yeah, all very vital lessons.
And I'm an optimist by nature, and you must be an optimist. Come on, you're doing science and you want to do science, you must be optimistic.
That too, if you want to do experiments, in India,
even more so. See, I tell I say this often, that at the end of the day, you're trying to study Mother Nature. And why should she reveal the secrets of nature to you every day and every time? So, you know, there will be small achievements, there can be bigger achievements, but they are achievements nonetheless.
Absolutely. They're so true. And crucial question, and this is something I ask everybody: why do they come back? Why did you decide to come back to India?
I decided to come back because, you know, abroad, you're always an outsider. Okay? And you don't have to be discriminated against upfront. Okay, but in some subtle ways, some things are always inevitable, let's say. And though I must say that I was very lucky. I had good advisor, good postdoc mentors, so I never faced any of this, right? But also the connect that you have with your people, and since, like I said, everything began with wanting to be a teacher, and given our country, our demography, our the status of our country, where there is a need for good teachers, even if you can teach for free, it goes a long way. And our culture, where education is very important.
Absolutely.
All these were factors where I was very much sure that I want to come back. Now it's all about timing, and
Absolutely.
that was not a doubt.
No, not a doubt. And it is a move which a lot of people actually think is an important move, right? Because it's a crucial move. It's not something you just think and you just take it up. There's also a lot of commitment towards that particular way of going ahead and things like that. So now that you moved back to India, tell us a little bit about setting up the lab and what were your experience and how was it. And I will also come to very crucial questions related to women in science generally, your experience in US, and of course having set up a lab in India. And first and the foremost as an experimentalist. Second is also a crucial role both as a woman scientist, and thirdly, more importantly, as a mother too at some point of time. These are all very overlapping and important roles. One place in your case at least. But I'd want to go in steps. And first of all, how was your experience to set up the lab? Because it's an instrumentation heavy lab.
Right. So, this system that I wanted to work with, and since when I got this position, ICER was in the project mode. I think project mode.
Yeah, you're right.
And that time labs were being set up,
Set up.
and so I was lucky. So this was one of the highest purchase equipments that got established. And so when I was abroad, I was asked if I needed some special setup or any special conditions for my lab. That was a very good move, I thought, because from there I said I need vibration isolation because that is critical for STM. So I have 2 vibration isolation platforms in my lab, and for my first system, and the only system that I have, of course, the lab setup was very smooth. The system came, and German engineer Heike, she set up the whole thing. And my first PhD student, it was Rajaul. It was a big experience for him as well to be involved in such a thing. But the machine was fantastic, and in Brian's lab I had worked with this kind of a system, and I added a prep chamber, so I customized it a bit to sort of have a wider set of problems to look at, and that worked very smoothly. And our HCross, with the UPS backup that we had, and we continue to have the vibration isolation platform, so it was reasonably placed.
Okay.
And since the machine came with everything, that ICER Pune doesn't have a machine shop. That did not prove to be much of a hurdle for me. And
partly because Pune also has a lot of good
machine companies which can build small pieces for you. But since my system had many things that at least for a decade I could look at the problems that I could look at, it was equipped with these things. I sort of fortunately was not on the back foot because of it.
Okay, nice. And we'll come to the aspect of a woman scientist. See, woman scientist, experimentalist. It's a double challenge because the commitment to time is, of course, for all the researchers, it is always there. But the commitment is not only temporal but also spatial. For people who set up a lab, you not only have to interact with people, you have to also be in the lab, especially in the formative years, where you're really trying to put things in an order which you would prefer to have, and there's a clear kind of signature of your own thinking there. How was that experience?
Right. So first, well, on the personal front, my son was born 6 months after my system was installed. I got married after I came here, and so that was the most challenging phase where, of course, uh, there is a daycare and everything,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I was very heavily invested in bringing him up, because daycare is a support.
Support,
You
yeah.
can't let your child grow up in a daycare, for instance. And those were challenging times. Luckily, my first student was also very good. He was also very motivated. And I also would tell him that, and I say that even now, that this is your PhD. We are collaborators. It is my job to train you. I cannot come and sit down next to you to take images. And every technique is different. And STM especially, Pawan, you have to be one with the system when you're taking data,
Absolutely.
when you're doing the measurements. I can come and tell, "Arey, no, do this, do that," because everything depends on the apex of the tip. What is going on, only you know when you're doing the measurements. And if I tell him to do something, and if it doesn't work, he is in the best position to know if that particular move will work or not. And that he has to decide, or she has to decide, because again, like I said, that tuning, because you're the first person to do that for your system at that point of time.
Nice.
So I am still a very I'm not at all a forget slave driver. I am not at all a micromanager. And I let the students explore. So in that sense, so Rajal later was once telling me that that you did not spoon feed us was very helpful, because I learned, so that ownership. He learned things his way. And then of course they are open to coming up with newer techniques, newer methods to etch the tip and so on, so finer things. But I give my students the freedom. And so that's why the ownership comes very quickly. And to this date, and for years to come, this will always be my style.
That's a very important way of functioning. In fact, in the longer run and in more efficient way, that is probably also a very good way to train people, right? Because if advisor and supervisor does everything,
or if you're breathing down their neck to do
yeah.
everything, give this by the end of the day, do this by tomorrow. I mean, no, it is their PhD.
It's their PhD. Absolutely right. Absolutely. So, give us a gist about your research problems which you are working on, and I would want to also expand a little bit more on your other initiatives and your thoughts on generally the science in India, etc.
So, I began with problems which were, what is it called, low-hanging fruits, so to speak. So, safer problems, simpler problems, also because I am not in a mad rush to publish, number one. And then this can also be looked upon as, as a negative aspect, that I don't go out and, widely seek collaboration, because in that sense, that technique is very complete on its own. I need theory collaborations, which I have been seeking, I have sought in the past also. But I am not in the because the field of 2D materials, I came from that background, and I worked with some molecules and some materials earlier on. But I am not in a mad rush to publish. That has never been my style of working, and having. So I don't work to publish.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's an interesting system, and like I said, with STM there can be many approaches, and sometimes while working you discover, oh, this is something interesting happening in the material that also you can pursue. So things are generally led by one broader goal, and then sometimes there are smaller things that emerge along the way, and we look at interesting materials, not at what can give me the most papers. That somehow, I mean, like I said, it could be bad thing, good thing, I don't know, but that is how I work.
It's a wonderful, important aspect of it. Are there any specific problems which you are very excited about? Because I know you work on 2D materials.
Right. So I recently changed. So after Rajal's thesis, I changed my research area. So I was also working on molecular assembly and all these things. But I changed that vertical to strongly correlated materials, which are sort of we can say richer in physics, and with molecules, there is a lot of manipulation, STM tip induced manipulation that you can do. Now, liquid helium is a challenge. Our plant is down currently, but we don't get a constant supply of liquid helium, which was there all along during my stay in the US. So I also started looking at problems where it is okay if I can also work at 77 Kelvin. And also
liquid
I can
nitrogen.
there's enough to explore. And of course, if and when I get 4 Kelvin, I also have a different set of problems to look at. So sometimes that's working in India, as you said. So you have to tweak your problems based on what is available. But then there are interesting problems to work with in either way. At low temperatures, 77 Kelvin or 4 Kelvin. So
yeah, wonderful. So Aparna, you also took an initiative to expand your own work, not only in terms of physics research, but also in education. I know, given the background you have and the interest you have, you always were interested in education. But to formally get into the stream of education itself is a commitment. And you not only join hands with other colleagues of ours who established this particular department, which is essentially the Department of Education within the
science education.
I should mention.
Yeah, I will make that distinction. Yeah.
Explicitly science education. But you also head the Science Activity Center, which actually is a remarkable place. If you are anywhere in Pune, you should visit
the Science Activity Center.
Yeah, if you are not in Pune, you should go and look up their online presence. It is truly really put IISER Pune on the world map, so to speak. Not only across the globe, but also very deep pockets within India.
Yes.
Where people need not actually have English as the first language or English as the main language of communication. And yet there is so much of science education, and in a very interesting way and in a very effective way, it has been done. So what were the steps you took to really also branch into this? Because this is a very important point. We are also at a cusp where Indian education, Indian research ecosystem is trying to diversify. A lot of people go into startups. A lot of people are interested in doing things which might actually be at the interface of academia and industry. That is one pathway to go. The other one, which I strongly believe, is at the interface of research and education, because India has a huge platform, and this interface is what you are actually also looking at. The third part is, of course, also like what I am doing, where you try to
communication.
Kind of communication, and also I've been interested in the history and philosophy aspect of it.
Yeah, of course.
That is one way to also branch to certain aspects of kind of expanding the horizon, so to speak. So what motivated you to do that, Aparna? And if somebody wants to take such steps, what are the things they will have to think?
Okay. I think it started with people inviting you for a talk. So Ferguson College, their Frontiers in Physics program.
Yeah.
I think that was the first talk I gave after sort of my son had grown up, and there was, I wasn't going out much then.
Ferguson College is one of the very famous and one of the premier colleges in Pune.
And historical.
Yeah. And a lot of students probably watch that. I know.
So that was my first time I stepped out to sort of talk about my work, and then I had a couple of talks where I went to schools and gave a talk, and that is something I like. Communication and talking about the work is something I wanted to do, and ours is the only IISER that has this dedicated outreach department. And Science Activity Center. So a couple of times I was called. So I'm a part of it now. I'll call it us. We used to have a Sunday series, where there would be some demonstrations on YouTube channel. The pandemic sort of accelerated it, where we have our dedicated IISER Pune Science Activity Center channel, YouTube channel, where we would show some demonstrations. Sometimes we would have a guest who would talk, and sometimes there would be questions from the audience which would be answered in the next session. So once I went to answer a couple of these questions, not a couple, 5-10 questions, And then later, from the IRO office, a senior colleague asked me if I wanted to be the faculty in charge. The IRO office was getting
IRO is
restructured. International Relations and Outreach.
Outreach in ISER Pune.
It was getting streamlined into different verticals. And a colleague asked me if I would be interested.
Nice.
And I said yes. And then I realized that, then again, some things come to you naturally. And then things started building up, and where we have teacher training workshops. So on a day-to-day basis, we have, as you know, we have Ashok Rupner and Ankish, who, they are on their own, they are so capable, and
Absolutely.
they do things. I'm there to advise, mentor, guide, and so on. And since when teachers come, I have a word with the teachers. And in our UG program, the MSD, sometimes I talk to the UG level teachers whenever they have workshops. So this is
And
sort
our
of happened
PhD
very
teaching assistants also.
organically. And our PhD teaching assistants, yeah. So it has happened organically, but I really enjoy it. This is, something very close to my heart.
So if somebody wants to take this, what is the kind of thought process they will have to go through? Because of course the commitment and motivation is necessary. But are there any things like, trying to expose yourself to certain things? Or is there any specific way you would also recommend people to do it?
See, teaching. So to understand, again, Feynman says, I think, that the best way to understand something is to teach. And I don't know if this is an urban legend or he really said it, I don't know. But I think if you are to explain a concept, then what is the best way to explain a concept? And if you can just, narrating what the concept entails, if you can supplement it with some activity where it becomes sort of, learning by doing kind of a thing. So now this has become a buzzword, activity-based learning. But where to explain something, you incorporate an activity in it, and then that sort of gives you, then your other senses are also involved. If that interests you, then you will see that you can design models, you can design activities, you can design experiments, small experiments that you can do in the classroom. And that's what we do in the teachers training workshop in the activity center when we organize. Because you will be amazed to know, Pawan, some schools I have visited, some teachers I keep talking to, some teachers I have visited in their lab. This whole thing, that teacher is in charge. The lab is, a closed cupboard, locked, nothing should break, nothing should be out on the table. And some labs in interior of Pune, they don't even have a microscope. This is where we are, and there is so much to do in terms of science education.
Absolutely.
Right? And so this is one part where there is a bigger component is also outreach. Okay? Where science education differs from outreach is, science education has so many aspects to it. There's, of course, the history of science, the philosophy of science, the pedagogy of science. And from outreach, what you can also, design studies to see how teachers learn, how children learn. What is the best way to convey a concept? So there are several layers to it. And that's why education, of course, broadly education has been studied, and even in the US there are several, worldwide actually. There are departments of education, but science education per se happens at different places in the world. We have in India a dedicated center, but that's only one center. And it is the need of the hour now, when technology has taken such a firm foothold in the domain of education, right? So we really need to know how we use technology. Is technology sufficient? There was this MOOC, MOOC, massive online
open courseware.
Courseware, Where is it sufficient? You have a course on the laptop, and you sort of do it, and then is that all? This is a big disruption. But how much of learning is there? At the end of the day, I firmly believe that you still need some human interface.
Absolutely.
Just learning from a computer, we survived, all of us survived the pandemic, thankfully. But is that sufficient? So there are so many open questions which are there today.
Absolutely.
And that's why science education is also very important, because there's also a science and society. The interface with the society. So there are so many open questions which need to be, so it's not just outreach. Outreach it goes way beyond outreach,
Outreach.
where science education is about teaching and learning of the science of education.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's probably the most important part,
Yes.
given the situation in which India is in,
Correct.
large student population,
Correct.
and
Our, what they call it, the demographic
dividend,
dividend.
demographic dividend.
To capitalize on that.
Yeah, but you can see also a lot of public policy people mentioning that it's a kind of a time where probably in 10-20 years that also will kind of gradually kind of go
Taper
into
down, yeah.
because then people become older, then the whole kind of dynamics and the demography
Correct,
actually
correct, will change.
So your thoughts on science and the way scientific research is done in India, both as a researcher and also as a woman scientist. I think surely there is room for improvement. We are the first people to will recognize, and most of the people, even in in the policy of the science, actually have that kind of clear cut thought. But what are your thoughts, Aparna? What are things which can improve, and what are important aspects which really needs attention?
Yeah, see, about you said about being a woman in science. See, my take on this is a little different. See, discrimination and all these are certain aspects. But what I also feel, because see, I did not work as a faculty in the US, and I did not do any science in India before I left.
Yeah.
So my experiences in that sense are very unique. And what I feel is, and I'll be very upfront about this, that generally there is this feeling that women cannot be average or above average. They have to be stars to be accepted in the community. And that, I think, is the biggest point of discrimination that we should be looking at.
Yes.
Because, again, not everybody can be a star. Not everybody will be working in a way to become a star. And we are all, at the end of the day, learning science. We are mentoring students. And this in itself is such a huge contribution to the society. Right? We are teaching students. We are mentoring our PhD students. We are mentoring postdocs if you have them in your lab. And then, of course, we are also reaching out to the society. At least I do in my small way. And these are all multifaceted, multifaceted aspects. And so I strongly feel that, having one metric to look at scientists in India is that perspective needs to broaden. Because you have to look at the individual, how he or she is contributing, and just seeing number of publications and number of citations, at least number of citations show where your work has reached. But measuring everything in terms of number of students you've graduated or number of publications you have, I think that needs to change. This is from a faculty perspective where I am at. And that way we have to be sort of more generous. You have to ask yourself, do you look at a woman scientist and a woman male and a female scientist the same way? If you are really honest, more often than not the answer is no. And that needs to change. In terms of mentoring students, we really have, see, American Physics Society. We have an Indian Physics Association, but I am aware of the IAPT, which is Indian Association of Physics Teachers. Right. Why don't we have an Indian Science Journal? In the sense, at the level of, why don't we have APS mirror in India? Why don't we have that? Why can't we come together as a community, start our own journals, build that kind of ethics, that kind of standards, very high standards, instead of, this whole predatory journal landscape that is out there. And that comes because, again, our university system is a different story altogether. But this race for publications, and then you want to publish in any journal that comes along, that is not nice. And, I have 15 more years of service left. I would really want us in Indian science to see have a kind of a society like the American
American
Physical
Physical
Society and
Society.
have that kind of a reputation and have people contributing, like how we want to publish in the American journals. I want scientists worldwide to publish in the Indian
Indian
journals,
journals.
and we really have to work hard to build. I don't know where to start. I am not that star in Indian science to sort of propose where we can start, but I think this is where we should start.
Yeah, it's a very important point what you're mentioning. Yeah, although because I'm also part of some journals, Indian journals, which are a part of Indian Academy of Sciences, for example, Resonance, and
So the Indian
those
Academy
are
of Science can start,
Yeah.
these kind of journals.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Research journals.
Research. Pramana is there, Pramana Journal of Physics, and Bhavana is there, which is a kind of slightly more very interesting mathematical aspects
Okay.
of.
And Resonance, of course. I know
Resonance
very
has
well.
been there. And there is also something called Sadhana, which is very good engineering journal. But they are all pockets, and also they have a good number of people who are contributing. But there is surely scope for improvement as you
See, all of us in these institutes, we know enough people, enough scientists abroad,
Yeah.
right? If we get together and have this vision to build a society like this and start at least 2-3 journals,
Journals.
I'm sure we'll have a fantastic editorial board,
Yeah,
which can vouch for the ethics and the integrity and what gets published. I think that unless we do that, Pawan,
Absolutely.
it's not going to change Indian science business.
You're absolutely right, because the scholarship is in the journals, at least in the sciences. Of course, there are other media through which a lot of
But
communications.
for us, for our bread and butter, it's the journals and the publications
exactly,
that get counted.
Exactly, because unlike, let's say, social sciences, book publishing is not the mainstream in conventional natural sciences. So therefore, journal publication is. I totally agree with you. In fact, these questions have been there for such a long time that even C.V. Raman asked questions. That's the reason why he started current science, by the way.
Okay.
It has a very rich history, and
Yeah.
that's what. There are certain pockets, and there are certain individuals who have taken initiative. Somehow collectively,
I mean I think we owe it to our nation to have this kind of a very emphatic footprint. Now, when the government has started this National Quantum Mission.
Yes, yeah.
Then that is at their level, that is a top-down thing. But at least we scientists can have that kind of a footprint. I think we owe it to ourselves and to our students.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. No, I totally agree with you, because it's such an important point of being, being actually one with the world. Because knowledge is that
Japan
way.
has Japanese journals.
Japanese journals, of course.
China also has. But speaking of Japan, they have their microscopy conference, for instance.
Yes.
And why not us?
Yeah, in fact, there's significant room for a lot of.
I know
changes.
we have lots of conferences keep happening. I'm not denying that. But to have this one like APS March meeting, every condensed matter, every experimentalist will know. So why not, dream big, think big, have that kind of a vision, and then work towards it. Like have, say, a 2-year deadline.
Yeah.
And then sort of like-minded people come together, propose this, work on this.
Yeah, so if somebody is listening, this is a very important point of what Aparna is mentioning. So Aparna, as we almost come towards the kind of concluding part, tell us a little bit about your future kind of ideas. What are the projects you are kind of looking forward to, and what are your plans, and how do you want to go about it?
I also want to, besides the research that I do, and then I said the problems that I choose depend on certain other factors, like what is feasible at this point of time in terms of liquid helium. I mean, these are real problems. I cannot shy away from those. Okay, I might have a fantastic idea, but to realize that also I need to think how I can work. I also want to make a mark in the domain of science education. Our department is set up. Our first faculty member, Sugat Dabholkar, who has a PhD in learning sciences. And I want to collaborate with the science education department. And this is there's something called discipline-based education research. This is known worldwide. In India, it doesn't have not much of a presence. Homi Baba, of course, they
Yeah.
do this kind of research.
Is HB?
Homi Baba Center for Science Education. So
Yeah,
it's
it's a very-
HBCSE.
HBCSE.
We have Professor Nagarjun from HBCSE
Yes, yeah.
who is
Who's
running. So
running
we are
it.
offering courses in science education, and now Sugat will also offer independent courses.
Wonderful.
And for this department, so there is a lot to do in science education domain also. And along with my own research in the lab, I also want to branch out in the area of science, discipline based, of course, physics
Yeah.
education research
Yeah.
is what I want to sort of seriously get into. But it's always challenging along with your own research to do physics education research. But that's sort of I want to branch out into the in the upcoming 5 years in the area of one of my verticals, 2D materials. I sort of that took a backseat because of all these family reasons, and now that I'm sort of I have more time at hand, I want to catch up on and
it.
sort of that's some newer problems that I'm looking at in 2D materials, in the 2D materials vertical. The strongly correlated materials vertical is always on. We have so many new exciting materials where superconductivity and magnetism coexist. So there are a lot of open problems in that area. So this is there exciting enough, but I want to go that extra mile and work on science education.
Wonderful, wonderful. This is actually a great kind of frontier, to be very frank, in my opinion too, because physics education, because of course, there's a bias here because of the physicists talking, but physics education has a lot to offer to a lot of futuristic technology, including medical technology, and therefore very strong physics education principles actually are very vital, right? Because how do you really take some very good ideas, not only from classroom to, let's say, a research lab, but also to industries, even to, let's say, policy maker, and all the way to parliament,
Yes.
so to speak. Because you can see a lot of things for you. You see the remarkable achievements of space agencies in various different parts of the world. So, yeah, I wish you all the best with all the ventures.
Thank you, Pawan.
And give us some recommendations. But I know you also read a lot. We
I
discussed, in fact, with one of the, I should mention, Aparna's office is just beside mine. We actually are office neighbors, and we have had very good discussion related to so many interesting things. And any specific recommendation, any aspects?
It's on my Twitter page. I read this very nice book about titled Horizons, which talks about the history of science. And that book is a must read for anybody who has a peripheral interest, even a peripheral interest.
James
in the history of science.
James Poshket Horizons, right?
Yes.
James Poshket
James
Horizons.
Poshket.
I've actually referred to that many times in my podcast.
It tells you how, other than Europe and America, the other part of the world was also contributing very actively to science. And I recently read
in serious way.
In a scientific way.
Scientific way, not like exaggerated kind of claims.
And I recently read this book titled Mathematician's Lament by Paul Lockhart. And he says how schools cheat us out of our most fascinating and imaginative art form.
Nice.
And where, pedagogy everywhere is driven by marks. So we really need to pause and, get our children to think, to explore, to voice their ideas. And that's where, more fresh ideas will come from. And he says something very nice about teaching here. Okay, in this book. So Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, The Little Prince.
I've heard about it.
So that's again a very nice book. And so he says, and Exupéry was again a very talented and multifaceted person. He says, if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea.
Nice.
And so I think this should be at the heart of every exploration that we take up in public, as an outreach, in our labs, or in a science community.
Absolutely. What a wonderful
That's
line.
what I'm guided by.
What a wonderful line. I hope you'll also actually take the ship into the horizons and showcase the beauty of science. That's the most important aspect of it. And it's been a wonderful conversation, Aparna.
Same here.
And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. And like I said, I really hope we have a Indian society of at least physics.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Thank you
yeah,
so much.
that's actually a great note to actually end the podcast this time. So this is Pratidhwani, where we try to humanize science. This time with the one and the only Professor Aparna Deshpande. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.